Throughout this entire tutorial, we've talked a lot about filming really beautiful footage, but that's really only half of the production value in a video. The other half is going to be your audio, and I can't stress enough how important it is to get really good, professional, clean audio. Right now, all of our audio is coming through these two lav mics, which we are running through this camera over here. But if we switch to the microphone built into this camera, you're going to be able to hear how much poorer the audio quality is. We have a lot of reverb, we have a lot of hum and distracting elements, and because I'm so far away, this just sounds horrible. So in this section here, I'm going to talk about all the tools and microphones that we use to get really good audio so that you too can step up the audio production in your own films. So first, let's talk about mic placement and the differences between external mics and built-in microphones. Now, all of your DSLR cameras or any camera that you have to shoot video is probably going to have a built-in microphone, and these generally do not work really well. They're included just so that your camera has the functionality of recording audio, but in most cases, the actual audio is going to be subpar. The first reason these microphones generally do not work very well is because they're typically positioned very far away from your subject. So if I was doing an interview, or as I'm speaking to you guys right now, this camera here, I mean, it's a good 10 feet away, while this camera is probably 4 feet away. So if you're familiar with the inverse square law with photography and with lighting, the same law applies to audio equipment. The closer that you get your microphone to your subject, the more isolation you're going to get with those vocals, and the fall off of all of the ambient noise is going to be diminished the closer that microphone is to your subject. So if we use these lav mics and put them really close to my mouth, you're going to get a nice clean signal without getting a lot of the distracting reverb from the room. But just like I said with the on-camera microphone, it's placed so far away that it's magnifying not only me, but it's also amplifying all the little nuances in the room, and generally that does not sound very good. So the big takeaway here is you really want to get the microphone as close to your subject. That's going to eliminate any of the ambient noises, whether that be an air conditioner, whether that be the chatter of an office, whether that be traffic, or just, birds and stuff out in the field. By placing your microphone close, you're going to be able to eliminate all of that and really only capture the audio from the microphones. So if you ever watch a broadcaster at a sports game and they're on the field or they're in the middle of a basketball arena, they have that microphone really close to them, and that helps them project their voice really clearly while eliminating all of the crowd noise around them. Now, there's a second reason why we don't like to use the microphone that's built into the camera. If you actually get this camera close enough to your subject, there are times when you can record really good audio from the on-camera mic. If you have an iPhone and you place it close to your subject, you can actually speak into your iPhone and get really good audio quality. But the second problem that we have is that because the microphone is built into the camera, it is also going to pick up every mechanical noise that your camera is making. So if you're holding it and you're bumping into the camera, that's going to get magnified. If you're flipping some of the switches or changing the settings, you're going to hear that in your audio. Also, if you do any kind of vibration reduction or have any kind of mechanical thing moving on your camera, that's going to be amplified as well. I know from our experience when we're out in the field, especially when we're recording really long takes that might be an hour long, we might be hot swapping batteries, we might be moving our tripod, we're recomposing, refocusing, and all of those little actions are going to make noise that the on-camera microphone is going to pick up. The other problem is these microphones are really prone to picking up wind. Because they're recessed into the camera, many times wind is going to blow across the camera, it's going to create that really distracting hum, and there's no way to fix that in post. And because it's built into the camera, there's also no way to modify the microphone by putting a windsock or a dead cat on it. So I say all of this just to show that using the on-camera microphone, while sometimes it can be effective if the camera and mic is really close to your subject, 99% of the time it's not going to be the most professional way to get audio from your subject. So now you see some of the problems you're going to face when using the built-in microphone. Let's talk about external microphones. These are definitely going to allow you to capture much cleaner audio, but there are some problems that you might run into when using these out in the field. One obvious downside to buying an external microphone is that they're going to be fairly expensive. I mean, obviously the built-in microphone comes with the camera that you bought, but if you start buying external microphones, I mean, this shotgun mic here I believe is $200. And then our favorite microphone are these lavs, and these come in sets where you have a transmitter and a receiver, and in this case we've actually upgraded the microphone itself. And so you might be able to spend $300 or $400 for a transmitter receiver pack. Or if you use the lav systems that we use, I mean, you could spend $1,000 for a set like this. So it's definitely going to be much more expensive than just using a simple microphone that's built into the camera, but I think you're going to find that this is worth its weight in gold. Invest in it one time and you can use this through your entire production, and it's going to guarantee that your audio sounds great. The second little issue that you're going to find with external microphones is they almost all need to be powered. So this shotgun mic, it actually needs phantom power to work. They make another version like this that has a AA battery built in, so you do have to carry batteries. This Rode microphone, it also has batteries as well. And in the case of the lav mics, they actually use the batteries in the pack. It runs through the cable. And this tiny little condenser mic also is run on the power of this. So when you're out in the field, you are going to have to keep up with the batteries and make sure that everything's powered and running smoothly, because once these die, the signal from these external mics is just not powerful enough to be accurately captured by your camera. Another thing to keep in mind when you're using a lav system or a wireless system is that sometimes you will get radio interference. I know that we've been in locations like New York City or even Rome where there was a lot going on in the city, and we found that other radio waves were interfering with our lav system. So it's something you always have to be monitoring and keep up with, because there are times when you're going to have to change frequencies and fiddle with that a little bit. It's one more little hassle, but it's so nice to have a wireless system where you don't have to run wires, 10 or 20 feet to your subject. You can just put these little packs on them, and it makes them mobile, and it gets rid of all the wires. It's super, super useful. Now with the lav system, it's pretty easy to set up. You just clip this onto your shirt, you put the packs in your back pockets, you're ready to go. But some of these shotgun mics, you have to also mount these. So you might need some kind of mic stand where you set it up and get it just out of frame. And that does require a little bit of setup and breakdown. Of course, you're also going to have to carry that gear around with you. So sometimes these mics sound really, really good, and you see these a lot on video shoots and in big movie productions. But they also require either a sound guy who's moving around with your talent, or some kind of mic stand where you permanently set this up and then you break that down with every production. And the final drawback to using external mics is sometimes you can plug them into your cameras. I'm going to show you how we like to set up our mics. But other times you might need something like a field recorder, where you have a dedicated audio recorder with you that has its own battery or its own power supply, where you literally plug the mics into this unit, you record externally, and then you're going to have to sync the audio up to your video footage separately in post. Having this gear, it's just another thing you have to buy, but if you ever start doing higher end productions where you need 3, 4, 5, 6 microphones running at one time, or you start working on more professional video projects, this is kind of an industry standard. So there are a few other things you might have to buy depending on the type of mic system that you use, but my goal in this section is to show you how to get the most simple setup so you can plug your microphone straight into your camera and get great audio. But you'll also know how to use something like this if you want to do more elaborate productions. So for this next example, I wanted to come outside so that we could have a real-world example without all of the reverberations that we were getting in the studio. And right now I'm speaking through the on-camera microphone, and I also have a Rode Video Mic Pro mounted on top of the camera itself. So I'm going to switch between the on-camera mic and the Rode mic, and you can see how much better that this sounds. You are still going to get a lot of ambient noise in your audio. It's not going to be as clean as the lav mics that we've been using. But if you are running and gunning and you just wanted a little bit better audio than what you would get with the on-camera microphone, this is definitely a viable option. But we really don't use this mic a whole lot because it still doesn't sound that great out here because the microphone is so far away. So the main problem with having a microphone mounted on your hot shoe is that the distance between your microphone and your subject is always going to be changing unless you were doing an interview. So this doesn't sound ideal, but if I was to move closer to the microphone, the sound quality is going to get much better. But now I'm right on top of the camera, and if I had to shoot wide angle, I might also be really distorted. So this really doesn't give you the flexibility that I think you need when you're running and gunning. So now I want to show you guys the difference between the on-camera microphone, maybe like a Rode shotgun mic mounted directly above the camera, and then this lav mic. This is the Sennheiser G3 lav system. So when we hear the difference between the Sennheiser lav system, and then we have the Rode shotgun system, and then we have the camera that just has the built-in audio from the built-in mic, you can hear how big of a difference the audio makes between all three systems. So if you can, I would definitely recommend using a lav system where you put the microphone really close to your subject. That's going to give you your absolute best audio. But in many cases, you might be running and gunning, you might be interviewing a bunch of different people. The Rode microphone on top of your camera is going to make a much better audio source than the microphone on your camera itself. So now I want to talk a little bit about the differences between a lav microphone and a shotgun mic. Now we have a Sonal MC24 shotgun mic mounted just outside the frame here, and as you can hear, there's a huge difference between this microphone and the lav microphone that I have by Sennheiser. Now the biggest difference you're going to hear between these two microphones really comes down to the reverb and the reflections that the Sonal microphone will capture versus the Sennheiser lav mic. The lav mic, it's so close to my mouth and it's kind of sheltered by my body that you're not going to hear all the reflections in this tiny room, where the Sonal mic is a good 18 inches away from my mouth. It's actually going to pick up a lot more reverb, and you can really hear that in this footage. Another big difference you're going to hear is the Sonal microphone really sounds more bright. It has more treble. It just kind of has a sharper tone compared to the lav mic, which kind of has a mid-range bassy sound. Now, you could probably fix some of this in post if you wanted to roll off some of the high-end EQ on the shotgun mic. Feel free to do that, but for us, a lot of the productions that we do require miking people that are on the go, and we can't really mount an arm with a boom and have the microphone placed perfectly on them. So most of the time, 95% of the time, we're actually using the lav system. So here we are once again outside, and I wanted to do a test between the Sonal shotgun mic and the Sennheiser lav mic that we use. Now, because we're not in the studio, we're not going to have some of the reverb and some of the reflections that we had. And this is probably a more realistic situation where you would use a shotgun mic. Now today I have the dead cat placed on the Sennheiser mic, and it is going to remove some of the highs. It's going to muffle the sound just a little bit, but it is kind of windy out here, so I also wanted to see how well this microphone held up with the wind, along with the Sonal that also has a windscreen on it as well. In my opinion, the Sonal definitely sounds better than the Sennheiser, but as you can see, we also have to have a light stand or a boom operator. Ideally, we would have somebody mounting this directly above me, but you can see how much hassle this is. We're running this microphone into an external recorder, and because this mic needs phantom power, you also have to have power in the recorder to power this as well, whereas the lav mic is powered by the receiver in my pocket. Now, if you have the crew members and you have the time and you want to make the absolute best production out of your audio equipment, I would definitely recommend using something like this with a boom arm and using the shotgun mic. But for a lot of the productions that we do, it's very easy just to put a lav mic on one of us. We can run around, I can turn around and completely face a different direction, and you're always going to get good audio, where you have to be very particular with the shotgun mic. Now, I want to go through the microphones that we use on a daily basis so that you can see exactly what we use to create our own videos. Now, our favorite go-to microphone is probably the Sennheiser G3 wireless lav system. And like I said earlier, this comes in a set where you have one that's a receiver. This goes on top of your camera and plugs into the camera itself. And then this is a transmitter. So this is going to plug into your microphone and it's going to transmit the audio signal to the receiver. Now, a set of these with the microphone and the 2 packs is about $630, so it's definitely an expensive investment, but for us, we have found that this has produced the best quality of all the microphones that we've owned. Now, the microphone that comes with this set is a Sennheiser omnidirectional microphone. We've actually upgraded the microphone on the Sennheiser pack to the Sennheiser MKE2 microphone, which is a condenser microphone that sounds a lot better than the microphone that ships with this unit. Now, this microphone is $389 alone, so you can easily see that the G3 unit plus the microphone can cost $1,000, but this was an upgrade that we thought was worth investing in, and I think from all of the microphones we've used in the past, this is definitely giving us the best audio quality. I just want to show you guys the difference between the lav mic that ships with the Sennheiser G3 microphones and the upgraded MK2E microphone that I'm currently using now. So this is the microphone that we use. I think it's like a $350 mic. It's definitely pretty expensive, but we've upgraded all of our lav systems to include this microphone because we feel that this has the absolute best sound quality of any of the lav mics that we've tested. I'm now going to switch over to the microphone that comes with the lav system. And you might have a hard time hearing the differences. They are pretty subtle, but to our ears, we feel like the upgraded mic is definitely well worth it. The other big difference, of course, is the actual shape of the microphone. The Sennheiser mic that comes with the G3 kit, you're not really able to add the windscreens and the dead cats to it very easily. So for that reason, we really love the MK2E microphone because it allows us to use all of these Rode accessories. If the Sennheiser system is outside your budget, I would highly recommend the Rode RodeLink wireless filmmaker kit, which is another wireless lav system, but it only costs $400. If you're just getting into this filmmaking and you want a really high quality lav mic that's wireless, I think you'll be really happy with this kit. And then later on down the road, if you need a second kit, maybe you upgrade to the Sennheiser, and you can actually use both of these in tandem. Now, when you're buying these Sennheiser G3 sets, they actually come in different frequency ranges. They come in like range A, B, C, and I think D. And we like to buy multiple kits and have different ranges so that they never interfere with each other. So down the road, if you wind up buying multiple sets, either for redundancy or if you want to mic up multiple people, you might want to buy different ranges so that they don't interfere with each other. Now, once you have a lav set, you're going to need to buy clips to attach them to the people that you're miking up. And the clips that usually come with the Sennheiser mics, we have found that they're not that great. As you can see here, the microphone can kind of wobble in and out. It's a big pain to get these off of the clips. And generally, these just aren't the best solution. So the clips that we found that are the best are the Sennheiser MZQ22 double tie clips. Now these are about $9 each, but what's nice about these is that they mount really snug to your clothes. They also have these little clips that hold the microphone away from your clothing, and you can actually mount, I think, 2 if not 3 microphones all on one clip. It also has this little built-in clamp on the back so that you can tuck your wires in, and that gets rid of any kind of snag that you might have, which actually will introduce noise into the microphone itself. And so as you can see here, I just have this clipped to my jacket, and I actually have 2 microphones running on one single clip. So no matter what microphone system you buy, I would highly recommend also buying a few of these Sennheiser clips, because for us, these have been a lifesaver out on location. One other little accessory I want to mention right now are windscreens. So if you're out on location and you have a lot of wind and it blows across the top of these condenser microphones, you're going to get a really bad distorted sound that you can't fix in post. It's essentially going to sound something like... So by placing a windscreen on top of your microphone, in many cases, you can completely eliminate that and not worry about having bad audio out on location. The 2 windscreens that we find work the best for these Sennheiser microphones are actually made by Rode. The first one is this small little windscreen. This is the Rode WS Lav windscreen pop filter, and these things are about $11. You can see I have one right here, and they're really low profile. They snap right on top of the microphone and they stay really snug. They don't fall off, and we have dozens of these that we keep in our bag just in case we need it for a little bit of wind. Now these windscreens are great for just small amounts of wind, but they definitely make a big impact. I'm going to blow on these 2 microphones so that you can hear the difference between one with and without a windscreen. So as you can hear, you do hear a little bit of wind on the microphone that has this small windscreen, but the microphone that has no windscreen is completely unusable. Now, for extreme weather conditions, if you're out on the beach or you're out on a very windy day, this little windscreen is just not going to cut it. And that's where we use this dead cat. Basically, this is a kind of a fur ball that you put on top of your microphone, and this almost gets rid of all wind. I mean, we've been in Iceland, we've been in hurricanes, we've been out on the beach, and without this thing, we would not be able to get any kind of audio that's usable whatsoever. Now this particular unit is also made by Rode. This is the Mini Fur Dead Cat. These run about $25, and they just kind of snap on top of the microphone just like the other windscreen. Now I don't know if you're going to be able to hear the difference here, but I'm going to blow on both of these so that you can hear the difference between the basic windscreen and the Extreme Dead Cat. Now obviously I'm blowing directly into this microphone, but from our experience, the Dead Cat works wonders out on location when it's really windy. So I would recommend having a few of these in your bag just in case you need to do an interview and the wind's blowing. You're not going to get back home into your studio and realize, oh my gosh, my audio is completely ruined because of the wind. Now there's going to be situations where you're running and gunning, you have your DSLR with you and you're trying to film video and you want better audio than what you're going to get from the built-in microphone, but you don't have time to put lavs on people and you just want something really, really flexible. In that case, it's really nice to have one of these shotgun mics made by Rode. This is the Rode Video Mic Pro with shock mount, and you see a lot of videographers with these. Basically, they fit onto your hot shoe, they lock down, and then you can plug the microphone directly into the side port of your camera. And what this is going to allow you to do is get much better audio than the built-in mic because it's going to be a shotgun mic. It's going to really focus on whatever's in front of your subject. And because it has this mount system, you're not going to get all those sounds when you move your tripod, when you refocus, when you change the settings. The audio quality is going to be much better because it's got this shock mount built directly into the microphone. What's also nice about this Rode mic is it has a built-in windscreen, so you don't have to worry about any wind hitting the microphone and ruining your audio. Another microphone that we use from time to time when we really want to up the production value and we want to include some of the ambient noise in a scene is this microphone made by Sonal. This is the MC24ES, and this is essentially just a super cardioid shotgun mic. Now we use this microphone, one, when we don't want to have to put a lav on our subject, we don't want to have to hide it underneath clothing, and it's also nice when you're shooting in a cool environment that might have interesting, waterfalls and sounds or birds, and you want to capture some of that ambient noise while still getting really clean audio from your subject. So we will mount this on a stand, we'll run the wires down to probably an external recorder, and then we can get really great audio that sounds completely different than what we get from the lav. So now that we've talked about a few different types of microphones and which ones we like best, let's talk about how you're actually going to capture this audio. There's basically two different ways that you could capture audio: internally in the camera and externally with an external recorder. Let's talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages of both of these systems so that you can choose which way you want to record the audio for your own productions. The main way we like to record audio is to plug the microphones directly into the camera and essentially burn the audio directly into the video file itself. And what's nice about this is that you don't have to sync anything in post later. The file coming off your camera is going to have both the video and the audio, and it's perfectly in sync. And so if you can figure out how to correctly set your camera up so that the audio sounds nice and clean, for us, this is by far the best way to record your audio. This is also extremely nice because it allows you to be really flexible and really portable. You don't have any external audio recorders, everything can be mounted directly on your hot shoe, and you literally can run around with your camera and a microphone and create really good footage with really good audio and not have to have a sound guy, not have to have any external recorders. It's just really, really simple, and that's kind of the way we like to run our operations. Now, there are a few problems with running audio directly into your camera. The first main problem is that the preamps in the cameras themselves are usually fairly cheap, and they're not the best when it comes to noise to signal ratios. Basically, they're very noisy, and if you up the gain, you up the amplification of your microphone in your camera, in many cases it's going to sound really bad. Here's a quick example of what bad audio could sound like if your gain settings are not set correctly. So in this clip, we have set the receiver on the Sennheiser mics really low, and instead we've boosted up the gain on the camera. And what you're going to be able to hear if I'm silent is that there's a lot more hiss, a lot more noise in the signal compared to what we've been filming throughout this entire lesson. So how do you solve this problem? Well, basically what you want to do is you want to set the preamp on your camera really low, set the input level really low, and then use the preamps in your microphones to get the cleanest amplification off of your microphone first and then input it into the camera. If you have your microphone set too low and then you try to bump it up with your camera, you're gonna get the effect that I just showed you where you get that hum, you get that hiss, and you're basically starting off with a less than ideal audio quality going straight into your camera. So I'm gonna go through and tell you the exact settings that we have picked for our Sennheiser lav mics and the GH5. But this is going to be one of those things that you really need to test on your own. Typically, if you get the Sennheiser mics, these settings will probably be the same for you, but you really need to check the gain settings on your camera and then throw those files into your computer and really listen to them with headphones and compare a bunch of different settings to see which one gives you the absolute cleanest signal. Once you figure that out, you can write down all the settings and you'll know them for the future. So the settings that we have found sound best for the Sennheiser transmitter, where the microphone is plugged into, is minus 24 decibels. That's loud enough to allow a good clean signal, but it's low enough to where if somebody gets really loud or starts yelling, it's not going to clip the microphone. For the Sennheiser receiver that's going to receive the signal from the microphone and then send it to the camera, we have that set to 0 decibels. By setting the receiver to 0 decibels, it's going to amplify the signal enough, but not amplify it so much that the camera is going to receive a clipped signal. Now on the GH5 cameras, we have set the input to minus 12, which is the lowest setting this camera goes to. And essentially what we're doing is bypassing the internal preamp of the camera so that we do not introduce any noise from the camera itself. Now we've been using the Panasonic cameras now for about a year, Almost every video that we filmed in the past was actually shot, believe it or not, on Nikon cameras. For the Nikon cameras, we had the most success setting the input level to 3 or lower. If we set it above 3 and we started to see on the visual audio indicator that it was going into the yellow, we noticed that we started getting a lot of clipping. So with the Nikon cameras at least, we like to keep our audio levels in the white and not actually hit the yellow and definitely not hit the red. Now, if you don't have Sennheiser microphones or you don't have these specific cameras that we're using, you really need to go through and set everything manually yourself. And the way I would do that, I think the correct way to set everything would be to go to your microphone and make sure that you have that set low enough to where it never peaks, but high enough to where you get a good signal out of it. Once you have your microphone set, if you're using labs or some kind of wireless system, you would then go to your receiver and you want to set that to where you can get a nice clean signal out of it. It's going to be the second most important gain channel. From there, once you have this set, you then are going to try to keep your audio level pretty low on your camera so that most of the signal is coming from your higher quality preamps found in your microphones as opposed to the ones in the camera. This can be kind of confusing, but if you just spend an hour one afternoon and just go through the settings in that order, microphone, receiver, camera, I have no doubt that once you get these files into your computer and really compare all the settings, you're going to find the perfect combination for the gain settings on your mic and the gain settings on your camera. Now, in many of these cameras, they are adding new features all the time, and one of the coolest features that they're putting in the cameras themselves are limiters or compressors. Essentially, what a limiter is going to do is it's going to look at the signal coming into the camera, and if it gets too loud, it starts to clip and get distorted, it's going to squelch that signal and prevent it from ever clipping. This is extremely useful when you're out on location and you're interviewing somebody that's really loud and he's yelling in a crowd, or if you have somebody who's just very animated and they quickly get really loud all of a sudden, you don't want that signal to distort. If your camera has a compressor, it's kind of similar to a limiter. It's basically going to bring some of the quiet sounds up, but it's also going to reduce some of the loud sounds so that everything falls within a specific range. If your camera has a limiter or a compressor, I would recommend turning that on and off and doing some tests yourself to see if you like the effect. But if you wind up recording without the limiter or the compressor in the camera, if you get a clean signal into your camera, you can always add those effects later in Premiere. Now, there is one caveat when using a limiter or a compressor, is that in many cases they contain the loud spikes so that they don't distort, but they're also going to amplify quiet levels as well. So if you don't have the settings in your microphone set correctly, sometimes turning on that limiter or compressor will actually give you a much noisier signal because it's trying to amplify something that's got a lot of noise because the levels aren't set correctly. Basically, what I'm trying to say is make sure you have as clean of audio as you can initially before turning on the limiter, because if you use the limiter to try to fix the mistakes that you have in the microphone settings, it's never going to turn out well, and in fact, it might actually make your audio more noisy. Now, in this next section, I'm going to talk about recording externally through an external recorder, but there is one other little thing I want to mention, and that is recording 2 audio tracks at the same time. Sometimes we like to record interviews when we do our Critique the Communities, or we might be interviewing 2 different people, and we don't want to use an external recorder, but we want to record everything into 2 cameras. We can either plug in a microphone on each camera and then sync later in post, but sometimes if people are really close to each other, their microphones are going to bleed into each other, and when you sync in post, you actually get some really weird effects. Let me show you what this sounded like on a recent production we did with Monty Isom.
How does a photographer get your attention?
Yeah.
Maybe that's a more pointed question. You started answering it, but how does a photographer get your attention?
You know, I think it can be a direct introduction from someone, you know? I think that's a great way. I think it's also, you know, I do think it's like being a human though. I think there are so many like mass mailers and things like that you won't open just because you have no relevant connection to them. You know what I mean? So like, I think, you know, plus sometimes what I notice is like, you're not always looking for a photographer, but when you are, that's when it's important.
So as you can hear, there's some really wonky things going on with the audio in that interview. And essentially what it is the 2 signals from 2 separate cameras are getting in and out of phase. Now, the phase of the audio, it's a very technical thing. It's a very, very minute detail, but when you hear it, you can tell that something sounds off. It sounds like they're in a weird room and there's a weird echo, and to fix it, it was near impossible to fix it in post. So what we decided to do is, instead of running audio into 2 different cameras and then syncing in post, we decided to run 2 microphones into 1 single camera so that both audio files were burned into a single file. This definitely solved the problem that we had of the in and out of phase audio, and now anytime that we film video with 2 people being interviewed, we try to run audio into 1 single camera as opposed to 2 cameras. Luckily for us, Panasonic makes a really cool hot shoe adapter for audio that is called the DMW XLR1. And essentially what this does is it allows us to have phantom power, it allows us to have 2 XLR inputs, and it gives us a lot of control over our gain stage in an external little device that plugs directly into the camera. So essentially what we can do now is we can run 2 different microphones into this adapter, and it's going to record 1 microphone into the left channel while recording the other microphone into the right channel. In post, we can separate those 2 channels out, make them stereo, and it allows everything to be synced perfectly into 1 file while still using 2 different microphones. So now that I've talked about how we like to bake the audio tracks into our video files, let's talk about what we do when we need to record more than 1 or 2 people and we need to use an external audio device. If your camera doesn't have an audio in to record a microphone, or if you want to record more than 1 person at the same time, or if you just want the absolute best audio quality possible, you're probably going to want to invest in an external audio recorder. Our favorite external audio recorder is this Zoom F4 field recorder, and essentially we like this because it has 4 inputs. You can put XLR inputs in here, it also has 1/4-inch jacks, and we can also feed our Sennheiser lav mic system into this. It has dials externally for every single channel. It records to SD cards, and it's got both a battery option so we can use this out on location, as well as an AC power supply. And essentially this just allows us to get both redundant audio, so if we are recording something really important, we can have a second copy on this as well as in our cameras, but it also allows us to record 4 separate tracks and have control over the audio levels of everybody if we're doing like a roundtable discussion. Because this has phantom power built into it and it allows all 4 mics to be powered, you can also use really high-end microphones with this that are going to be much harder to use on your DSLR cameras. So this not only powers your microphone, but it's going to allow you to have complete control over everything in a very complex scenario. Another thing that's nice about units like this is most all of them are going to have a line out, so you could actually plug a cable from this recorder into your camera and copy the 4 tracks that this is recording into the camera itself. And it also has a headphone jack so that you can monitor the audio directly from the unit itself. Some of the disadvantages of using something like this is you're probably going to need another person to listen to it and monitor audio. You have multiple batteries that you have to keep up with. You have extra memory cards. There's more files. It's bulky. You have to carry this thing around. We actually have a little like carrying case that we can put around our shoulders that holds this thing. But overall, it's kind of a pain to use out in the field. And the biggest disadvantage is you're going to have a bunch of audio files that you then have to sync to the video files that you've captured on your camera. If you use a program like Pluralize, it's not really a big deal, but if you don't like syncing 4 audio files to the audio that's in your video files, it does take a little bit of extra time, and this might not be the route that you want to go day in and day out. So for all of these reasons, we rarely use this recorder unless we're miking up more than 2 people, or if we're just shooting something that's really important and we want that extra redundancy, we might pull this recorder out and use, but honestly, we probably only use this about 5% of the time. Now, all of that being said, I do want to tell you a quick little story about something that happened to us recently where we were running microphones into each camera and we had multiple people being interviewed, and at the end of an hour-long interview, one of the cameras corrupted. We had 3 or 4 cameras in the shooting environment, so we had plenty of footage to cut to, but we actually lost like the last 20 minutes of audio from our main person being interviewed. And because we didn't have any of that audio backed up on an external recorder, when that file corrupted, we were kind of stuck without having the final 20 minutes of that interview. So I just want to really emphasize that sometimes it's worth bringing out an external recorder like this if you want redundancy, Because if you're in a situation where someone's time is very valuable, or you're on a location that you're not going to be at again, or you don't have the advantages coming into a studio and re-recording something, you want to take those extra steps to guarantee that your audio files are safe and that you have multiple copies of them in case something happens to the audio in the files themselves on the camera. Speaking of being really safe with your audio and having redundancy, another really important thing that you're going to want to do every time you're filming audio is you're going to want to monitor that audio. So when we're filming our productions, we always have at least one, if not two people monitoring the audio going into the camera or monitoring the audio going into our field recorder, so that any wind noise, any battery that dies, any snag of the cable that's caught, any kind of noise that's being introduced into the audio is caught. We can stop everybody, have them redo those lines, or we can fix any problems right then and there without any surprises when we get back to the studio. There's been so many times where I've done a quick audio test, taken off the headphones, and then I've tried to monitor the audio just by using the visual indicator, and then I get back to the studio and realize there was interference with the wireless signal, there was noise in the background, my microphone was popping, and the whole time I thought it was okay because I was monitoring the audio visually, but nobody was actually monitoring the audio with headphones. So when you get into this and you start doing this day in and day out, make sure you monitor your audio with headphones. Now, just like I said, some cameras may not have an audio in to record audio. Some of these cameras actually don't have a headphone jack out to monitor the audio. So if you're buying your first DSLR camera or mirrorless camera to do video, I would highly recommend making sure you have both an audio in to record audio from microphone and that you also have an audio out so that you can monitor that audio with headphones. So here in a minute, we're going to go into Premiere and we're going to show you how you can sync up multiple files and get the audio perfectly synced up among different cameras. But first, I want to show you a technique that we use almost on every one of our shoots so that we can visually see the beginning of every audio track and manually sync it really quickly without having to use any software like Pluralize. And basically what that is it's called the clap. We simply say 1, 2, 3, we clap, that gives a big spike in our audio. And every single camera that has a microphone, whether that be one of these lavs or that's the built-in microphone on the camera, is going to have that really large peak, and then we can line everything up, at least initially, so that we have a good starting point when we go to sync our audio. A lot of times on high-end productions, you'll see like a clapboard. It's essentially doing the same thing. It's giving a visual cue. They might write in what scene they're doing, what take they're doing, but then they hit that clap, it gives you a loud popping noise, and then you're able to use that later so that you can sync up all the audio quickly and easily. So if you're running multiple cameras, definitely get in the habit of counting down, giving a good clap, and then when you get all the files back into Premiere, you're going to know exactly how to sync them up with a visual cue as well as the actual audio itself. So now that we've really kind of wrapped up all of this with the audio section, let's go into Premiere, let's sync up a few different files and show you how you can get everything as precise as possible. All right guys, so now that we've talked about all the gear that we've used, all the microphones that we use day in and day out, I want to quickly take you into Premiere and show you just a few little tips that we use to sync audio perfectly. So there's a bunch of different ways to sync audio. There's some that are very automated, and then there's some very manual ways of syncing audio. But I'm going to show you the techniques that we use so that you guys can get up and running and get your audio perfectly in sync with your video. So the first thing I'm going to do is I have Premiere open here. This is just a new project. For this first example, I'm going to drag over some footage that we shot recently on a Tamron video. I'm going to let this import. And we have two different clips here. Both these clips are shot at 23.9 frames per second. And both of these cameras had a microphone running into it directly. So just like I have two mics in this video that we produced on location, we had two mics on me, and then each of those microphones ran to a separate camera. So we had redundancy in two different files, two different cameras, two different microphones. So I'm just going to throw these files in here and create a sequence. I'm going to throw the second clip right on top here. And sometimes you can see that Premiere throws these files in with some gaps. I'm just going to grab this top file, bring it down so that it's nice and even. And if you look at the waveforms here, you can very easily see that this is the same audio. Everything looks very similar, and you'll get to a point where you can kind of visualize this, and you can quickly see that like, oh, maybe this clip doesn't match the other clip because of the way the waveforms look. So everything looks pretty good here. I'm pretty confident that these are the right files. Now the first way I want to sync this, I'm actually going to use an automated feature that's built into Premiere, and that's the synchronize feature. So this is really only good for 2 video clips. If you had a third clip that had another audio, say an on-camera mic, or even another very clean audio from a lav mic, this synchronizing feature doesn't really work well with 3. In fact, I don't even know if it will work with 3, but it works perfectly with 2 audio clips. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select both clips here, right-click, and I'm going to go to the synchronize button here. Now this gives you a bunch of different options. I'm just going to click audio here and then hit OK. And it's going to take a second to process. And basically it's just looking at the waveforms and it's going to move them over so that they are perfectly in sync. Now I'm going to use the shortcut keys A and S to zoom in and out of our footage. S zooms in while A zooms out. And basically I'm just going to go to the edge of the block right here. And I'm just going to keep zooming in. And you can see that both of these waveforms, audio 1 and audio 2, they look like they're perfectly synced. So if I hit the spacebar and play this now. So what I have here is the new Tamron 70-200 2.8 VC G2 lens. So you can see everything's perfectly in sync. Now in a situation like this, we have very clean audio in both video tracks, but we really only need one audio. So I'm not going to export this video with 2 audio tracks. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to mute one of the audio tracks, and then we have that as a redundant copy in the case that one of the microphones popped or started having some static, or maybe it had some radio interference. So what you first want to do is figure out which audio source sounds the best. Now if you go over here, we have these M and S buttons. M stands for mute track and S stands for solo track. So if I hit solo, it's only going to play the audio in track 1, which is really nice. It's going to mute audio track 2. But if I hit the mute buttons, I can then mute a single track and have all of the other tracks play. So imagine if I had 4 or 5 audio tracks, maybe I have some music playing, I also have some sound effects, maybe some shutter clicks, maybe some ambient noise. I could mute the tracks that I don't want to hear, or if I wanted to hear a specific track, I could hit the solo button. So these 2 little buttons are really, really useful. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to mute track 1 and hit spacebar. And this is one of my favorite lenses for taking portraits because with the 2.8 aperture, so I hear that track and then I'm going to unmute it and I'm going to mute track 2. I can really blur out the background and bring the most amount of attention to my subjects. Now, to my ears, both of these tracks sound about the same. The microphone's mounted in the exact same spot and they are the exact same microphone. So in this case, I don't think it really matters which audio track I'm going to use, but I typically like to keep audio track 1 and then mute everything below that. I just like to have the topmost audio track being used, whereas the other ones are muted. So I could come down here and select this track, and then I could hit unlink so that it removes the track from the video file above it, and then I could right-click again and turn off enable. So what that's going to do is that's going to turn off the bottom track so it's not being used at all, but it's going to still give me access to the 2 video clips above, and then if I wanted to cut between angles, I could cut this and then I could move this over to the side and basically have 2 camera angles. So if I hit play here. Lenses for taking portraits because with the 2.8 aperture, I can really blur out the background and bring the most amount of attention to my subjects. So you can see I have the advantage of having 2 camera angles, but I'm only using audio track 1. Now what we typically do here in F-Stoppers is instead of unlinking the audio from one of the video tracks and then turning off the enable button, we like to turn the audio all the way down so that it's still linked to the video clip. And what's nice about this is the audio will not be audible, but it's still perfectly synced with your footage. So let me show you how we do that. If I hit Control-Z a few times, I'm going to go back to where this is now linked. So if I click on either of these tracks, you can see it's going to highlight the corresponding audio. And so we want to mute track 2. I could mute the track over here. I could right-click and then turn it off by turning off Enable. Or I could simply come down here to audio gain, and this is actually what we do. I go to audio gain, and let's set the gain to -99. And so if we hit OK, what it's going to do is it's going to make this waveform so quiet that you're not going to hear it anymore, but it's still perfectly synced to the video track above it. So if I hit play now, D2 lens. And this is one of my favorite lenses for taking portraits because with the 2.8, you can see we still have the 2 video clips perfectly synced up, audio is still synced, but we have now turned off the redundant audio. It's still there if we need it. If I hear a pop or if I, hit the microphone or something and there's a good take on the second mic, I can then just come down here, maybe cut out a little section of audio, go to audio gain, and then I now know it's minus 99. I'm just going to hit 99 to bump it back up, and I now have my redundant audio back. I could then potentially cut out, let's say, the top one, minus 99 that, and you can see I have a little section here where it goes from the audio from track 1, and then it uses the audio from track 2, and then it goes back to using audio from track 1 all the way through the video. So we will use this technique a lot, especially if we're in windy environments or if somebody hits their microphone or you start getting radio frequency problems in one of your microphones. You can always cut back to the second mic, and I would say this is the technique we use 99% of the time. So what I want to do now is I want to show you guys another way to sync audio without relying on the automated synchronize function found in Premiere. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in this other footage here. This is from a previous project we did. And here I actually do have 3 video clips. They're all shot at 24 frames a second. So I'm just going to drag all of these down and put them on top of each other and line them up as best as I can. And one thing you'll notice is when you throw video clips into Premiere, you have to wait for the audio to conform. So right now, only track 3 is showing up in a wave format, whereas tracks 1 and 2 are still being built. I can actually go over here and make these audio tracks larger, and I could rearrange my screen a little bit. This is kind of nice if you're working with audio and you want to really get in there and view everything in a nice clean fashion. I could bring this up. And so now my audio tracks are going to be really large. So I'm just going to wait a second here for this to import, and then when we cut back to the screen, you're going to see all the waveforms in their entirety. All right, so everything's conformed now, and we have our 3 wave files. I just want to show you guys, like, these 2 files here in 1 and 3 are the same length, and you're probably wondering why file number 2 is so much longer. Our GH5s have 2 different types of MPEG-4 files that they can record. In file 1 and file 3, they were set to stop recording every 4 gigs, and then they make another file, and I did not import those files in. Whereas this camera 2, that camera was set to record indefinitely, so it created a much larger file. So what I'm going to do, just so it's easier for you guys to visualize, I'm just going to cut and delete the second half of file 2, and now you can see we have 3 files that are about the same. And if we look at these files, you can see that they look pretty similar. So what we did here was camera 1 actually has both microphones running into it, and then camera 2 and 3 have just the on-camera mic. So cameras 2 and 3, the waveforms look very similar, but they're really bad audio, whereas camera 1's audio track looks very different, but it's actually the good audio. So what we need to do is we need to sync all 3 of these up, but we're still only going to use the audio track from 1, and then we're going to mute the stereo tracks here on 2 and 3. But because these audio files look so different and we have 3 separate files, if we were to come up here and just hit the synchronize button in Adobe Premiere, it's not going to work very well at all. So instead, let me show you a technique that we use to manually sync these up. And this does take a little bit longer, but I'm going to show you why it's really important to do that clap sync so that you can easily see where the sync points are. So if I just move track 1 and I turn off the solo button and zoom in, here's a huge spike right here, and chances are that is where we clap. So let's hit play. And you heard the clap right there. You can actually kind of see it in the frame. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to razor blade this and delete that. So I know that the beginning of this clip is where the sync is. I'm going to now pull this file out, and I think the clap's going to be right about here. This looks like the highest point right here, so let's listen to this. You guys are... And there's the clap. You can actually visually see it there, so let's just cut and delete that. And we'll move this back over. So this is going to be pretty close. And then we'll do that for the 3rd and final clip. You can see why this takes more time. So I would have thought this was the spike because those are really high points, but they are not.
There you go. Sync. And sync.
You guys are... And there's the clap there. So I can just cut this and delete that. Now if I zoom back out and put these close. Now if you look right here and especially right here, you can see where the audio gets really quiet on all 3 tracks. So now it's pretty close to being synced. If I just hit play, you're going to hear.
If you do for any reason want to address the crowd,
You can hear how much reverb there is, and that's because it's playing each track individually, and they're not perfectly synced. So what I want to do here is I just want to pull these back a little bit, and I want to sync these visually. So I know the clap on track 3 is this line right here, so let's move this and get it as close as we can to that. And then 1 and 2 actually look pretty close. I'm zoomed in all the way, so now let's play this back.
just look at each other. If you do for any reason want to address the crowd, it's
So you can hear there is still a slight reverb. A lot of that is because of the on-camera microphones, and you can hear that I'm talking really far away. And if we mute track 2 and 3, and we turn off tracks 3 and 2, track 1 doesn't actually show Monty's face, but track 2 does, and then track 3 shows his face really well. So if we play the audio from track 1 and view track 3,
Peter, first of all, thank you for doing this interview with us. We're pretty excited about it.
so as you can see, everything looks synced, and many times I'll actually turn different clips on
Coming here to Bond,
and off.
which is a great theatrical poster
just to make sure.
agency, as well as you guys are doing.
So we have everything perfectly synced at this point. Now, it's not very precise, but it's close enough to where I think, you wouldn't really tell a difference. But there are certain situations where you might have multiple microphones bleeding into each other, and the sync is off just enough to where audibly you can tell a difference, even though you might not be able to tell a difference visually. So if I zoom in as far as I can go here, you can see the spikes of where the clap is, but I can't zoom in anymore. So one little workaround that you can do to get your audio really precise is you can go up here to these 3 little bars, and you can turn on this setting called Show Audio Time Units. And when you turn that on, and I zoom in more, you can see I can now start to zoom in beyond the 24 frames per second. I'm actually able to zoom in into the actual wave files themselves, and now you can see here, right here where our claps are, you can see that the sync is actually still off just a little bit. It might be correct up to a frame or 2, but it's not perfectly in sync. So what I can do here is I can actually move this around, and you can see I'm zoomed in so much that when I move my footage to the left, it's actually not moving it at all. I have to really move it far for it to make any kind of difference. And that's because we are zoomed in past the actual frames. So what you have to do to get this perfectly in sync is you have to choose one file, and then you have to come up here and hit unlink. And what that's going to do is unlink your audio from your video. And now I can move this ever so slightly to try to line this up. I'm going to do the same thing with track 3. We're going to unlink, and I'm going to move this over just a touch to where now all of the claps are happening right on top of each other. And if I play this back,
just looking at each other. If you do for any reason want to address the crowd, this would be.
you might not be able to hear the difference here because we did get everything synced up pretty well, but our audio is much more in sync than it was previously. And if I re-click track 1's audio and video, I can come up here and hit link, and it's going to now connect them. It is going to give you this little minus 0.2, which tells you that it thinks that the audio and the video are off, but we know that we just synced that perfectly. We're going to do the same thing with track 3, was the other one that we synced. So we can link that together. And now we know when we cut between any of the camera angles, everything's going to be perfectly in sync. So the big takeaway, I know this could be a little confusing, and I just want you to know how to do this in the event that you run into this problem later in your own productions. But the big takeaway is, by doing a clap, you can zoom in really closely, and you can find those spikes in your footage visually, and then you can move the footage around and sync it up perfectly to at least give you an initial sync, or just to give you a sync to where if you're running 1 or 2 microphones, you can get everything synced, and it's going to look okay to the mouth. But if you get to where you need to sync everything really precisely because you're getting some kind of phase, or you're getting some kind of reverb, or you're getting bleed through in 2 different mics during an interview, you're definitely going to want to go up here and turn on Show Audio Time Units so that you can zoom in very, very closely. I mean, I can get down to where like the wave file is literally the actual wave. And this is really useful when we're using multiple cameras where maybe we have one good audio running into camera 1, but then camera 2 and 3 have the on-camera microphone, and that's only being used as a reference for the sync. So we can zoom in, find the spike, sync everything up, and we're good to go. Now there is one final way that we film a lot of our videos that requires some tweaking in Premiere to get the audio to sound right. And that is when we run 2 microphones into one camera. Since acquiring our Panasonic GH5 cameras, we use this accessory, the DMW XLR1 XLR microphone adapter. And basically that sits on top of the hot shoe, and it allows us to plug 2 microphones into our camera, and it separates the signal into left and right channels, and then it also gives power to where if you wanted to run external microphones that needed phantom power, it does that as well. So when we use this adapter, we can actually plug 2 microphones into one camera and then have the tracks split to left and right. So essentially we're getting 2 separate clean audio tracks, but one's becoming the left channel and one's becoming the right channel. So let me show you a scenario where Lee and I did an interview where we both had microphones on, and instead of using multiple cameras, we just ran one GH5 with 2 mics in it, and we wound up with a file that looks like this. And so as you can see looking at this file, we have a stereo file here, and unlike the other files where these waveforms should be identical, it's a mono microphone being replicated twice in stereo, we actually have a very different waveform on the left side compared to the right side. So if I play this back,
we will show the highest rated image, and Patrick and I will rate this one.
this is it.
This was the highest rated shot by the community.
So basically, if you look at this, Lee's microphone is being displayed in the left channel and my microphone is being displayed in the right channel. But if you were to export this final video, you don't want the audio to be on one side and the other. We want it to be a mono signal in both left and right ears. So in order to fix that, what we need to do is we need to duplicate this audio clip. So I'm going to unlink it, and I'm going to hit Alt, and I'm going to click this and drag it down to where we now have 2 of the exact same audio files on top of each other. And then what I want to do is I want to basically make channel 1 all the left channel, and then channel 2 all of the right channel. So there's actually an effect we can use in Premiere, and it's called fill. If we just type in fill, and it's fill left with right, and if I drag this and throw it on the first clip, it's basically going to fill the left channel with the right audio. So it's going to mute the left and fill it with the right. And then if we go up here to fill right with left, it's going to do the opposite of that. It's going to mute the right channel and fill it in with the left channel. So now, essentially what we've done is we've recorded 2 microphones into the camera in stereo, duplicated that, and then we've now made the whole thing mono again. And if I hit play,
and Patrick and I will rate this one.
this is it.
This was the highest rated shot by the community, and you automatically win a tutorial of your choice.
So I don't know if you can hear it in the footage, but basically Lee is now coming both through the left and right channels, and then when I talk, I'm coming through the left and right channels. If we come over here to the audio graphic visualization and hit play, you can see that the levels are even across both the left and right channel. Now, are we rating this based on how well this is done on an iPhone or a cell phone, or is this rated as if this... So this is really handy if you have a way to separate your tracks and put one on your left side of the signal and one on the right side. It actually gives you a true stereo sound that you can then manipulate and separate out as you need. So in many cases, we'll just run one camera, plug in 2 microphones, and then if my microphone starts scratching, we could actually mute my microphone while Lee's talking, and you're not going to have that bleed through. It's really, really handy. And if you want to run 2 microphones, like I'm actually doing in this video right now, one microphone's going to the left channel, the second microphone's going to the right channel, and we could either just play both back because they should sound exactly the same, or we could choose one of the microphones, fill it so that it's stereo, and then we would have a backup copy that's still burned into the track. So very, very useful technique there. One reason this is really useful to run 2 different microphones and split them in stereo is that if we put it all in mono in the camera, and let's say I was really quiet and Lee was a little bit louder, there's going to be no way in post-production to bring up my volume without also bringing up Lee's volume. But if we separate them left to right and we find out later that maybe my volume was a little low, I can boost my left channel up to match Lee's and then in post make it a mono signal again so that it's coming through both ears, left and right. So this is really, really useful, especially if you're doing interviews. It is a little weird to put your headphones on with the camera and monitor one person in your left ear and one person in your right ear, but it's a very simple way to separate your audio and not have to have an external recorder to get multiple tracks. So now that I've shown you several ways that we like to sync audio and get everything to play perfectly in Premiere, let me just show you a few little tricks and tips that we use daily to improve the audio in our productions. One common thing is many times these audio tracks will not be very loud. It might be recorded to where it's kind of hitting at -18 or -12, and ideally you would want it to hit maybe at -6 or -3. And so one quick and easy way to increase or decrease the volume of your audio is just to right click on it and hit audio gain. The two settings that we use the most here are adjust gain by, and we could set this to any set number just to bump it. So if your audio is hitting right here at -12 or at -9, you may want to just bump it by 3 decibels, and that will bring up the whole levels just a little bit more. Another really useful one here is normalize peak level. And basically this is going to find the loudest peak in your entire waveform, and then you could set that to a specific number. So you could set that to say -3, and then you know that the loudest part of your audio is never going to clip. It's going to be at -3, and then everything else will be as loud as it possibly can. Now, the problem with this is if you do the clap, perhaps the clap is the largest and loudest peak in your entire waveform, and you may not even care if that's distorted because you're going to cut that out. But all of your other audio, it might be really quiet, it might be really loud, and it's overall just not a very clean and consistent wave file. So there's one effect that we can add to our audio that's going to bring up the quiet levels and then also suppress the peaks so that they're not distorting, and that is called a compressor. So if I type compressor into Premiere, you can see we have a couple different compressors here. We have the tube modeled compressor, the single band compressor, and then the one we usually use is multi-band compressor. So I can take this and drag it onto track 1, and it is going to add the multi-band compressor here to our effects. And there's a little drop-down menu that just chooses different presets, and you can play around with these to see the ones that you like the most. We like broadcast quite a bit. It's going to give your vocals a really punchy sound. It sounds great if you're doing podcasts or broadcasts, but sometimes it sounds a little too mid-rangey to me when you're out on location and you're in a studio. It starts to sound a little fake when you can see visuals. It might sound great if you're watching, a screen capture, but it might not sound the best if you're actually on camera. The one that I like a lot is the enhance highs. And what enhance highs is going to do is it's going to bring your lows up, it's going to bring your highs down and make them all a little more stable, but it is going to give a little more emphasis on the highest range of your highs. And for the human voice, I find that this allows it to cut through the mix just a little bit better. So if you're out on location and you have wind or you have car noise, or if you put music underneath your video productions, the enhance highs is going to allow your vocals to cut through just a little bit clearer. Now once you've chosen your favorite compressor setting, you can also go to edit here, and it's going to bring up a bunch of settings that you can change. And you could actually turn up your output gain so that your overall audio becomes louder. And because this is a multi-band compressor, we actually have different bands of frequencies that we can tweak. So if we find that we want even more highs in our production, we could actually come over here, and this is going to bump, I believe, anything above 10K. And then this one here, it's going to bump anything right around 5K. And then this yellow one, this encompasses this entire range right here, which is kind of around 1K. And then the blue is the lowest one that's going to really change your bass settings. So you can come in here and really play around with these. That's kind of what all of these presets are doing, is they're changing, the way the compression falls among these different frequencies. But this is really useful if you want to tweak the very nuances of your compressor and get it to sound as perfect as possible. Down here, there's also some settings like the brick wall limiter. And what a limiter does is it basically says anything that hits a certain peak, let's say -3, it will not allow it to go above -3. It's going to put a wall above that frequency, and it's going to prevent it from passing that. So limiters are really nice when you have clean audio, but people get really loud and they spike a lot on the waveform. You can add a limiter, and then no matter how much you increase this output gain, it's going to raise everything up, but it's going to keep those peaks below, say, -3, so that you don't get any distortion. So you may want to play around with the limiter. It's also a really nice effect to put on your audio to guarantee that there's no loud spikes and distortions when people get loud. Now, one problem that we have had adding something like a compressor or any of these effects to these clips is that if you have multiple clips and then you find out that you want to tweak that compressor, you have to go through every clip, highlight them all, remove the compressor, tweak the compressor, paste it back on all the files, and it becomes really, really annoying. So there's actually a really cool way to add a compressor, not to the individual files, but to the individual channel. And by adding a compressor to the channel, it guarantees that anything that's in channel 1 is going to have these effects added to it, anything that's in channel 2 is going to have these separate effects added to it, and you can turn off your effects on and off and tweak them in one place as opposed to copying and pasting them to each individual track. So let me show you how you can do that. So right now we are in the effects control panel up here, and because I have audio track 1 highlighted, you can see that we have the compressor that I just added. I'm going to hit D, one of our shortcuts, and delete the compressor off of there. And now if I go up to Window, I can come down here to Audio Track Mixer, and if I choose that, it's going to bring up our different channels. And in this case, we have channel 1, we have channel 2, and then the last one is going to be your master channel. That's going to be all of the channels flattened down into one. If I want to put a compressor on just the audio in track 1, it's very hard to see, but there's this tiny little arrow up here. If I click on that, it changes the screen to this. And essentially, this is an effects control panel for channels 1, 2, and master. So I can come up here to these little triangles, and if I hit this, I'm basically getting all of the same audio features that you would find in Adobe Audition. So this is really, really powerful, and it took me a long time to find this, but once we found this, we use this all the time. So you can add different delay effects, you can add reverb, you can change the pitch. There's a lot of different effects that you can use, but if we go up to Amplify and Compression, and we go to Multiband Compressor, it's basically thrown the same multiband compressor that we had in the effects on channel 1 without actually pasting it into the waveform itself. So now that the multiband compressor is in the effects bay, it's actually active and it's using whatever the first preset is, which is, I believe, broadcast. So let's double click this, and as you can see, it now opens up our effects editor, and sure enough, broadcast is selected. So I could come down here and now hit enhance highs, just like the one I like, and then I could close this, and we now also have our output gain here, so we can bump this up to turn up channel 1 as well. So if I hit play and find a section where I'm actually talking,
Another
sky to overcome the limit of what this sensor probably. So you can see I'm kind of hitting at -6. I could come up here and bump this even more. Let's bump it up by 7. And let's listen to that little clip again. Another sky to overcome the limit of what this sensor probably could do.
Yeah, I would.
And so you can see it's going to increase the volume, but because there's a limiter and a compressor on there, it's going to prevent it from distorting. But I'm going to get those nice effects of the compressor here in this audio bay instead of actually having to paste it on the audio file itself. And then for channel 2, I could come down here and I could also go to compressor and add another compressor for Lee's audio. I could go to hard limiter and double click on hard limiter. And this one's kind of nice because I could tell it to do the maximum amplitude. Let's say I only want it to ever hit -5. I could click that, but then I want it to boost the entire audio, let's say by 5 as well. So what it's going to do with this is it's going to boost all of the audio coming in on channel 2 by 5 decibels, but it's never going to allow any of the peaks to go above 5. So in that little range, it's basically going to compress the signal anytime a peak approaches that -5 decibel threshold. So the hard limiter and the multiband compressor are the two effects we use almost in all of our productions, and we like to throw them into this audio track mixer so that all of the audio files on our actual timeline are as clean as possible, and then we can quickly go back and edit these effects towards the end of the production right before we export our videos. Now there's one other little thing that I want to show you guys. I'm not going to dive into Adobe Audition because that's a whole other can of worms that you guys can explore yourself. But what's really nice about Adobe's dynamic link function is that if, say, there was some really weird noise in audio track 1, there's an air conditioning hum and it's blowing in the background, if I had, say, 10 seconds of just that hum, I could actually right-click the file, go up here to Edit Clip in Adobe Audition, and it would bring that WAV file into Adobe Audition, and then I could run some really specialized effects like noise reduction. I could sample that hum from the air conditioner, and then I could remove the hum from the entire track, and then when I save the file in Adobe Audition, it will automatically replace the WAV file in Premiere with that file that I just tweaked in Adobe Audition. So when you start using After Effects and you start using Premiere and you start using Audition, they're linked up in such a way that it makes it really powerful to do everything just in Premiere and then use these external programs to really tweak your footage. So if you find yourself really enjoying tweaking audio and you want to get into the fine minutia of getting everything perfect, definitely look into using Adobe Audition, because you can do a lot of these effects in a much more precise manner, and in many cases you can save audio that sounds a lot less professional than you would have liked. So that's basically everything I wanted to show you guys in Premiere when it comes to audio. There's a lot of different audio effects that you guys can play around with. There's some really wacky stuff if you want to add a lot of reverb and that sort of thing to your productions. But I do want you guys to know how to sync multiple different ways. Definitely check out Pluralize if you're doing this day in and day out and you want to save a lot of time. And then use these compressors, because they really are going to make your audio sound that much better. If you get a great compressor with a great microphone and a good clean signal, it makes such a big difference. And when you start watching more YouTube videos or you start watching, TV shows or broadcasts, you're going to hear how good the audio sounds, and at some point you're going to notice a lot of that is the reverb that they add, or the compressor that they add, or even the limiter, a way to make everything loud without it actually clipping. Nothing sounds worse than getting audio that's clipping. It just makes your whole production sound really unprofessional. So I hope you guys found this little section useful. It took us a long time to figure out some of these little details like the compressor and how to zoom in past the frame rate and see the actual waveform. But I just wanted to show you some of the most useful features in Premiere that we use on a daily basis so that you guys can import your footage and then sync it up as quickly as possible.